Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the Consumer Duty, Ensuring Financial Resilience Through AI in Client Screening. We have here Babel Street, who's a trusted technology partner for the world's most advanced identity intelligence and risk operations, and Napier, a new breed of RegTech delivering anti-money laundering and financial crime software to financial payments and wealth management institutions. So today I'm honoured to be joined by two fantastic speakers from both of these companies, and we're going to be discussing the Financial Conduct Authority's recent consumer duty and what benefits it gives to financial institutions to help consumers and shape the future of the industry. First, just some housekeeping items. So the session is going to last 30 minutes. It's being recorded and will be sent to you as a follow-up. And feel free to pop questions in the chat as well, and we can answer those as we go or make room for them at the end with a Q&A if we have time. So just a few introductions. I'm your host today. My name's Elise Thrale, and I'm the head of content at Napier. And I have two guests joining me. I've got firstly Dr. Catherine Havasi, Chief Innovation and Technology Strategy at Babel Street. And Dr. Catherine Havasi is a technology strategist, artificial intelligence researcher and entrepreneur. And she got her PhD in computer science from Brandeis University. And in her role at Babel Street, she helps to set the direction for all products strategically and technically. And then we've also got Dr. Janet Basterman, who's Napier's Chief Data Scientist, also Chair of the Royal Statistical Society Data Science and AI section, and also member of the FCA's newly created Synthetic Data Expert Group. She started coding in 1984 and discovered a passion for technology then, and holds multiple degrees and a PhD in computational neuroscience. So a long list of things for both of you. So good to have you both here. Welcome.
Really good to be here.
Thank you.
Good to have you. All right, so let's kick off with the first question. What is the consumer duty? What does it mean for financial institutions? Maybe I'll turn to Catherine first. Can you give us a bit of background on the new UK regulation and what it is?
Sure, absolutely. I think the real purpose of this regulation is to safeguard the welfare of consumers and to really elevate the standard of care of consumers and to prevent harm. So it's basically centering the consumer in consumer banking. And I think it's a real game changer for resiliency for the industry, especially in all the exciting times we're going through today. And it's an opportunity for us to improve internal processes that have external impact. So how can we make the consumer experience better and make sure that we have measurable outcomes when we make those improvements? I think it makes the UK a real pioneer in this area, and it couldn't have come at a better time. We're having this revolution in artificial intelligence and natural language understanding, which I think for the consumer can be a double-edged sword depending on how it's implemented. You know, we can use AI to improve the customer experience and constantly improve things like onboarding and KYC and company responsiveness, et cetera. But we also could run the risk of, you know, taking efficiency above all else with this AI and not centering the consumer. And so I think this really places us in the right place to move forward here.
Nice. And any thoughts from you, Janet, on how AI can influence moving forward with the consumer duty?
I know Catherine's given a really great summary, and I think one of the things she really touched on there was the if implemented correctly, and that's one of the things that we're seeing. Obviously, whenever there's new regulation, people want to get compliant, and sometimes there can be a bit of a more haste, less speed situation where they'll rush to just bolt on technology that they think might tick a box without really thinking about what does the legislation and regulations mean, what do they need to change, and really adapting all of their processes. So that's a big thing that I think any new legislation company they really need to think about.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess as we look forward then on how financial institutions will deal with this when looking at customer due diligence and client screening, what are the ways that AI can play a part in this and help make it more efficient and automated?
Yeah, so we're looking at things like, I say, we need speed, but you do need to have accuracy with that speed and clarity on how you've got the certain results that you have. And that's really, really important. So while AI is really good at having that process at scale and you can really focus on those key tasks, it does come with risks. So that correct implementation is really important. But when you look at, particularly in the screening process, there's so many places where AI can add value, both from really intelligent matching of individuals against intelligence data. And then once you've got those matches, helping with that review process to make sure, are those matches good quality? How quickly can you get through them? How do you really improve those workflows to make sure that you're doing all the right things and that you're producing the right information in order to fulfill your regulatory responsibilities to be able to inform the end user with the result if required. But one of the things we really need to focus on is ensuring that that transparency is there, and a lot of the AI systems that have been developed over the past decade, really, the transparency has been a secondary to accuracy and to speed. It's always been a race for how quickly can we do things and how well do we match our training data, rather than how does this perform in the real world and how do we explain what's done. So we really need to look at putting the right bits of AI in the right places. And there's a whole wealth of things that it can do beyond just the screening, the risk analysis and all the things that Catherine touched on, really being able to look at large volumes of data. And this is the thing that AI is very good at, is doing tasks that you would just need an unfeasible amount of humans to do, or would take a very large amount of time. And that's where AI can really benefit.
And I think that we're increasingly running into those tasks. We have ended up in situations where, it's harder to use official channels to get some of the data that we need to understand company ownership, to understand relationships between individuals and organizations. And so then we have to go out to the world as a whole to find those relationships. And that's a lot of information. And beyond that, with screening, goodness, I apologize. Goodness, with screening, okay. With screening, I think it's a real path to resiliency. This is what I get for, I'm on the East Coast and this is my morning, so it's pretty early for me, of the US. So I think screening is a real path to resiliency. I mean, I think there's an expectation to have AI at this point in the KYC process, and it helps the bank process all this information, like Janet was saying. But I think there's also a real issue for consumers with false positives. So, right, folks with very common names, people who might have overlap with someone on a PEP list or a sanctions list, that can be very difficult for them. And there's a large fraction of customers who get stuck in the KYC process. And that both hurts them in being able to do financial transactions when they want to do them, or onboard onto a new bank. And it's probably worth noting from the consumer perspective that somewhere around 2 to 5% of consumers do get stuck due to false positives. And some of those just turn from the bank altogether and they go somewhere else that might have a KYC process that's a little bit more optimized. So it both hurts the consumer, it hurts the bank. And if we make these processes better, we keep people from ending up in situations where perhaps they can't get their mortgage approved when they need it because of a false positive.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It seems like the consumer duty is so focused on the customer experience, and the best way that we can enhance that is with AI, so that, like you say, they don't drop off during those onboarding processes. Okay, that's great. And then as we move on to the next question, I'm going to ask you, what do you see the benefits are of this and the potential risks as well when looking to integrate AI with the consumer duty?
So I think that we're really in a position where obviously we've talked a lot about some of the benefits and some of the risks, but I think an unsaid benefit here is that we can use this as a motivator to push technology forward. As we think about innovation and financial compliance, it usually is motivated by external factors, be it world events or regulation in one way or another. And I think we're seeing such advances in technology that it's really good to see advances in regulation that also push that technology forward to improve internal processes. I love that the regulation almost pushes screening and onboarding to get more and more accurate and improve the customer journey through onboarding here in a way that I think is really helpful for the industry. I think we, in the same way, can push back into artificial intelligence, right? We think of both explainability and configurability as being key important drivers in developing AI that's safe and effective, not just for our industry, but overall. And pushing, using regulations like this to sort of push that forward as an industry, I think is really helpful. It gives there to be a commercial motivation to develop technology in this area that will really benefit other areas, even outside of banking or KYC.
So maybe outside of the UK, is that something from a US point of view that you see that could come to that side of the world?
Oh goodness, I don't know, right? I think the US sometimes lags a little bit in regulations, but certainly as we see, you know, when we're recording this week, you know, it's been about a week since we had the AI Act come out in the EU. We're starting to see, and shortly before that, we did have an executive order here in the US about safe use of AI. So we're certainly seeing pushing regulation from that front as well. So we're more likely to see explainability requirements come into, I think, global financial or US financial regulation through safe use of AI in high risk situations.
Yeah. And Janet, on your side and across our side of the pond where it's already happening, have we seen any lessons learned at Napier from customers making changes today who are integrating AI already to address the consumer duty?
And we are seeing some sort of positive, some less so, depending on where they are in that journey. So, I mean, I think the big takeaway here is just trying to just add AI on top of what you're already doing doesn't work very well. What you need to do is take that step back, review what you're doing, and maybe review what additional processes, workflows you need in order to comply. And then once you've got that in place, then look at where you can put those building blocks to have the efficiency and the automation and that extra intelligence that AI can bring. So that's the big thing, is you can't just go out, bolt something in and expect everything to be perfect from day one. Where we're seeing it done well is where those customers have taken that step back. They've done an end-to-end review, looking at how things work internally for their compliance processes and how can they effectively and efficiently give the customers what they're entitled to in terms of explanations. And what we are seeing is that not all solutions out there will give that. Obviously, the past 12 months has been a huge rush to basically bolt generative AI onto everything in order to generate explanations. But you know, it's not accurate. It's designed to be a good narrative and convincing narrative, but not precise. So you need to be really careful when assessing solutions and making sure that they will actually give you that compliance. So that's something else that we're seeing. And then something that Catherine touched on sort of in one of the first questions about the data itself is that you may have complete blind spots in your data. And if you rush to add these deep technical solutions on top of data that's incomplete, that won't give you that picture, then you'll get the wrong results coming out, because these systems don't tend to say, we don't know. They're designed to give you an answer. And if you're not feeding in all of the information they need, unlike a human that will go, oh, hang on a minute, we're missing huge chunks of information, they will still give you an answer. So, and this goes back to the needing the human oversight for a lot of these high risk situations, is really that double checking. It's there to make the information efficient, and then you need that layer to go, yeah, I agree with this, which is why you need the explanation and understanding. And I guess the other thing that we're seeing is where it's done well is a real investment in testing to make sure that these work, because you need to understand what data you've got. I mean, going back to the screening, understanding what your true positives and false positives are, so you can really test these things, but also that grey area of things that are false positives, but you always want to investigate as part of your risk profile. It's important to have them in your test set as well, so that whenever you're applying this technology, you can do that quantitative valuation of, is this better? Is this faster? Is it more accurate? So that you've got that confidence. And one of the things that I am seeing from regulators worldwide is that push to have that information available. So it's something you really need to think about when you're looking at these technologies.
And I think to sort of build on that, one of the things that I think is really interesting is when we think about things like some of the more modern AI technologies, we're often working in situations where the number of even gray positives, right? Not true positives, but gray positives is very, very small. And I think being able to use AI responsibly in a situation like that really requires both high quality data and a lot of attention to data, but also a lot of attention to the idea that maybe sometimes you are looking for something very rare. And certain ways and approaches of doing things often excel in that way, and certain ways don't, right? And a lot of the AI that's been getting all the attention recently, it's not very good in that kind of situation. So I think that's a real important thing to note, right? If we're looking for something that might not occur very often, there's a lot of thought that has to go into that.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess moving on to thinking about how the consumer duty might be better or might be different, sorry, than other regulatory obligations in the UK that financial institutions have to deal with. How might it influence global practices and regulations in the future? I'll go to you first, Janet.
Yeah, well, we're seeing, I mean, we've already touched on a few of the things that have come out. You've got sort of the US with their AI, we've got the EU AI Act. We're seeing both regulations on AI itself and regulations on finance. And what's really important is that if you're using AI in finance, you need to comply with both. So it's really important that you're aware of what's going on in all of the countries that you operate in. So if you have customers in sort of the UK and the EU and the US, then you've got to make sure that you are compliant with all of these. That's really, really important. But what I am seeing when reviewing all these regulations is while there are nuanced differences between them, and it's really important, you know, we're not going to have time to unpick them all in this webinar, but there are similar themes, and the themes are human in the loop, transparency, privacy protection, because quite often there's the risk of some of these AI systems exposing personally protected information, and that ability to inform the end users or the people who are affected by the decision. And that's true whether it's in finance or not, and it overlaps very well with the financial regulations that we're seeing coming out. And then additionally, you're getting that push to use it, because with all of the financial regulation, making sure that you can do this at speed and at scale so that you can give people the information at the right time. We don't want people with, as Catherine was mentioning earlier, sort of their accounts blocked for extended amounts of time, because that can have a material impact on all aspects of their life. You know, say maybe getting a mortgage, you know, maybe, you know, even being able to open a bank account in a certain place in order to pay in a salary. It can have huge impact. So making sure that we get it right is critical. And that's where the legislation is moving, is for that end user protection and making sure that all of the companies, financial institutions, do the right thing using the new technologies. We do have sort of extra overlay in terms of protections and concerns that are more general around AI. They're evolving very, very quickly. And I think outside of the things that we're talking about today, it's worth keeping an eye on. But really that transparency, privacy protection, human in the loop, and informed end users that will keep you compliant with most of worldwide, but please do check everything to make sure that you've ticked all the boxes.
Great, thank you. Any thoughts on that from your side, Catherine?
No, I mean, I think as was mentioned, I think it's important. The thread through all these regulations is centering the consumer, and I think that's so important, both through from an AI perspective and from a finance perspective. And it's good to see that happening in the UK. Really, leadership there.
Yeah, yeah. And so I know we've mentioned a few times as Janet puts it, the human in the loop aspect of AI and transparency. And also we've touched on explainability. But I just wanted to go in a little bit more in depth into the ethical considerations and how to mitigate potential biases when using AI for the consumer duty and all of these consumer-centric regulations.
So I think one of the things that's important in that we haven't really touched on yet is trust. And one of the things that's going to make this succeed and makes a consumer comfortable with it is building trust. And you're building trust a couple of different ways. You're building trust between the consumer and the financial institution, both that their data is being treated with respect, that that the systems are free of bias and are going to make fair decisions, and that they understand why decisions were made and that explanations are available to them. And so those things build trust between the consumer and the financial institution. But I think we also have to think of different ways to build trust. Has to be trust between the analyst and the software that they're using. And I think a lot of that has to do with sort of long-term performance. It has to do with testing. It has to do with explainability and, frankly, interface design. I think everyone talks about prompt engineering being a new career that's coming out because of AI. I think AI, human-centered AI interface design is something that is going to become very important as we move forward. I think we have to design systems for people and AI to work together to make decisions and to put the human in the loop that maximizes our effectiveness and our AI safety. I think that's going to be very important. And lastly, we need trust between the regulator and the software. And I think that's something that we've been working on as an industry for some time. So each one of these pieces, I think, is really critical.
I mean, absolutely, because that trust bit is so critical. I mean, for years, sort of the artificial intelligence community were saying, trust us, we're the experts, we've done it right, and here's your answer. You don't need to peek in the box. And I think it's really important that as a set of pressure, we've been moving over the past few years towards this more open sort of way of doing things, where it's like, we're going to show you how we got to this answer so that you can then start trusting us, because it's what you do. If anyone came to you and sort of told you something, you'd want to know why, until you got to a point where you could trust that individual and you knew why they were telling you these things. And we should apply the same thing to machines. And it's something that the Turing Institute here in the UK found with some research, that as humans, we want explanations from machines in the same scenarios we want from humans. And when we're talking about things that have this material impact, we want to be sure that we're doing the right thing. No one sitting in a financial institution wants to block people's accounts just because they've got a number that's over a critical threshold. They really want to check that they're doing the right thing. And so we need to give that information. And there will come a point where that trust has been established, where they don't necessarily need to go through all that information with a fine-tooth comb, but it needs to be there, because maybe the next day somebody new to the business is coming in and they will want to establish that trust themselves. So that is absolutely critical, and how we do that and making that easy. And it's one of the reasons we've seen the explosion we have in the past 12 months, is that we've gone from these sort of complicated command line APIs to just something that's there, it's usable, it's user friendly, and it's made interacting with AI easy. And that's how it all should be. One of the other things you touched on in that question was sort of the ethical side of it. And I think ethics is something that AI's had a little bit of a checkered history with going back. And I think one of the reasons for this is that a lot of companies, while they want to be ethical, don't necessarily know how to encapsulate that in a way that can be measured and tested. So I think that's a huge thing, is that if you're implementing AI, simple things like stating that you don't want to adversely affect, let's say, marginalized groups in society that might be banking with you, make that a clear statement, and then think, well, how can we test this? What do we need to put in place to make sure that we're not doing this? And then you've got something that you can check with all of your releases. And I think that's really important. And then beyond that, just as Catherine mentioned, sort of that real proper thorough testing. because you need to understand your data and what it's telling you, and then you need to keep testing it, because the way in which we interact with financial products now is different to how it was 10 years, 20 years ago, and it will keep changing. So we need to keep looking at how that data is changing and make sure that AI is still working well and still giving good answers. And the test results and the explanations and that human validation is what you need as part of that entire package. Otherwise, you just won't have an unbiased ethical system.
Yeah, I like the comparison you made by thinking of AI as humans and humans having to earn our trust. So why shouldn't AI have to earn our trust as well?
Absolutely.
That's a very good point. All right, we've got 5 minutes left, so I'm not sure we'll get time to cover too many questions. We've just got one last question from me, which is on your predictions for 2024, as it's so close to the end of the year. As we look ahead into the next year, do you have any thoughts or feelings about what's going to happen in 2024 about the use of AI, how we can do it better, if we're going to get there, with all of the points you made about the transparency and trust? Do you think we'll achieve that in 2024? I'll start with Catherine.
Well, I think with AI models, I think we're seeing tremendous improvement. And I think there's been a lot of focus on combating hallucinations specifically. So I do think that's going to get better next year. And I think that's incredibly welcome and important. But I think there's a lot of thornier issues that AI has been dealing with way before it was in the spotlight that we'll continue to work on. And from a financial services perspective, I certainly think that we're not in a situation where the world is likely to get any less complex in 2024, unfortunately. And, you know, we're sort of in a position where it could be a very busy year from a regulatory perspective. So I guess one of the things that I'm excited about that I think is happening is I would love to be able to have companies have better visibility and processing around onboarding for consumers. And I think this regulation pushes that in the correct direction. One of the things that we're seeing is a continued trend towards globalization and towards customers who are more cross-border. And I think that that's something that continuing to build out solutions that help with that next year, that trend will continue. I think it's really important. I think we're going to see data get harder to find in certain places, and that's a continuing trend, unfortunately. But I hope that technology that we continue to develop can help us sort of solve some of those, or at least solve is probably a big ask for 2024, but we can start pushing in that direction. So, and help understand how everything is connected globally.
That's positive. And Janet, any thoughts for 2024?
Yeah, I think Catherine's covered a lot of the great ones. I mean, that data piece is just the thing that we really need, because all of the AI stuff runs off data, and with all of the great data protection that we've now got in place, it means that you really need to think about what data you need and how you're going to get it at the beginning. And then, so you've not got the luxury of just finding data you need and banging it all together and coming up with a model. So really considering sort of where things could go, and then making sure that you get that consent up front if you're going to use data, and also looking at where all these silos are and can we start putting them together in a way that's consistent and compliant with all of the data protection, so that we can start building that picture. And that becomes increasingly problematic as soon as you go cross-border, because every country's got their own rules and regulations about this. So just, I mean, for me, a sort of a wish list item for next year would be that ability to have at least a step on the path, you know, because like solving this in 1 year is never going to happen, but a step on the path for some global data partnership where it comes to finance, so that we can quickly sort of deal with the false positives that just happen to share a name with someone on a list, you know, all of those sorts of things, but then really start looking at the individuals that are of interest, the ones that are our true positives, and we can only really do that if we have the right data. So that would be my wish for next year.
Yeah, I think the sentiment from both of you is that continued collaboration and globalization, and I'm sure we'll take a step in the right path in 2024. So that's it. We're at time. Thank you so much to both the guests of the webinar for your time and for joining us with all of your insights. And thank you also to our listeners and for listening in and sharing questions with us. And I hope you learned something from this and found it insightful. Just to let you know, there's also a couple of handouts next to the webinar to delve more into AI regulations and client screening in general. But I hope everyone has a great rest of their morning or afternoon, wherever they are. And thank you, everyone.